bring Professor France Brown to come and introduce our student speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Prohl. I'd like to ask our student speaker, Clement Hall, to make his way to the stage. Clement Hall is a native Houstonian who is zealous about integrating biblical ethics into the common culture of his city through the preaching of the Word of God. For 6 years, he has served as senior pastor of the Second Advent Baptist Church, a local congregation that works to prepare souls for the return of Christ through practical application of biblical truth. Clement is a graduate of Sterling High School in Houston and earned an Associate of Science degree from Houston Community College. His commitment to faithful biblical proclamation led him to discontinue his studies at the University of Houston and to pursue pastoral ministries at the College of Biblical Studies. Clement has proven to be excellent in his studies as well as in ministry skills. In 2017, Clement received second place in the National Haddon W. Robinson Biblical Preaching Competition presented by the Evangelical Homiletic Society. Today, Clement is joined by his wife, Cinquenta, and their 1-month-old son, Zachary. And there they go there. Good to have you. Clement would continue his theological studies by enrolling at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you preacher, Pastor Clement Hall.
Permit me, if you would, to thank Professor Brown for that wonderful introduction. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the CBS administration, members of the board, friends of the college, faculty and staff, my fellow graduates, and everyone present this morning. It is an honor to stand before you as the student speaker of the 2017-2018 College of Biblical Studies commencement ceremony. This is a bit surreal because growing up, I never imagined that I would have the prestigious privilege to stand before a college class to deliver a commencement speech. Perhaps this moment was never a figment of my imagination because as the youngest of 5 children, I was naturally the slowest, the weakest, and obviously the shortest of the 5. As a result of this reality, when my siblings and I would engage in extracurricular activities such as basketball, football, and/or baseball, they would brutally beat me, little brother, every time. There was one game, however, that my siblings and I would play that I would brutally beat them every time. This game is internationally known as the legendary Simon Says. I suppose that I was able to overcome my siblings when playing Simon Says because, unlike football, Simon Says is not a game that is interested in the ferociousness of your foot speed. Unlike basketball, Simon Says is not a game that is interested in the width of your wingspan. And unlike baseball, Simon Says is not a game that is interested in the abnormal strength in your hamstring. Because all you need in order to be successful when playing Simon Says is to have the ability to follow instructions. Just as a person's ability can position them to be successful when playing Simon Says, it has been brought to my attention in 28.5 years of living now that your ability to follow instructions can also position you to be successful in life and ministry. Therefore, my fellow graduates, as we prepare to walk across this stage straight into a life of ministry, let us never forget that we can be successful in our lives and in our ministries if we develop the ability to follow instructions. As we walk across this stage, straight into a life of ministry, let us never forget that our ability to follow instructions is what got us to this point, and our ability to follow instructions will take us beyond this point. Therefore, the question that should pierce the cerebral cortex of our frontal lobe this morning is, how do you and I, my fellow graduates, position ourselves to be successful in life and ministry? King Solomon, the son of King David, answers this question in the book of Proverbs, chapter number 4, verse number 1, when he says, "Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding." Tightly tucked within the confines of this one verse are two practical principles that you, my fellow graduates, and I should follow as we prepare to transition from the seat of a student to the stands of a teacher. First, if we are going to position ourselves to be successful in life and ministry, it requires that we live the lessons that we have learned from our instructors. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. The word hear in Proverbs 4:1 comes from the Hebrew word shema. It literally means to lend your ears to the instruction of an instructor with the intent of doing what they instructed you to do. It's the picture of an athlete who positions themselves to defeat their opponent by lending their ears to the playbook of their coach. It's the picture of an employee who positions himself for a promotion by doing the policies and procedures of his employer. It's the picture of a student who positions themselves to be successful in a classroom by lending their ears to the instructions of their instructor. But what good does it do an athlete to lend his ear to the playbook of his coach? And what good does it do an employee to lend their ear to the policies and procedures of their employer? And what good does it do a student to lend their ear to the instructions of their instructor if they do not intend on doing what their instructor has instructed them to do? For the past few years or so, my fellow graduates, we have lent our ears to the smooth speech of Dr. Sullivan, who taught us that prayer does not work, but that God works through prayer. For the past few years or so, we have lent our ears to the boldness of Professor Brown, who taught us that faithful biblical exposition begins with a commitment to Bible study methods. For the past few years or so, we have lent our ears to the lectures of Dr. Loken, who taught us to appreciate the words of the wisdom literature. For the past few years or so, we have lent our ears to all of the College of Biblical Studies professors who taught us something to help us get to this point. But what good is consuming all of the information that they taught us if we do not plan on doing anything that we have learned over the course of these few years? Therefore, my fellow graduates, let us not be so proud that we walk across this stage straight into a life of ministry while we leave all of the knowledge that we accumulated at the threshold of a classroom door. We ought to take what we have consumed here at the College of Biblical Studies and walk into a world of ministry while living the lessons that we have learned from our instructors. It's because it's very dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, to abandon what you have learned. I learned this when I was about 6 or 7 years of age. I was run over by a 6,000-pound van. Wait a minute. Before you feel compassion for my pain, please hear my story. The sun was shining. Not a cloud in the sky, grass was green, birds chirping, flowers blooming. It was the perfect day for children to go outside and play. My brothers and I ran into my mother's room and begged her to allow us to go outside to enjoy such a wonderful day. After asking her several times, she finally agreed to allow us to go outside, but she did not let us go outside without first giving us her instructions. She told my oldest brother, Chris, watch your brothers. Sean, stay out of trouble. Clement, stay in my yard. But by the time the screen door swung open, The instructions of our mother began to leak from our ears as water leaks from a leaky faucet. We got outside and Chris was not watching his brothers. Sean was in all kind of trouble and no Clement was not in the yard. I was about a block or so from my home when a van runs the stop sign and hits me off of my bike, runs over me with 2 tires, and then I'm rushed to the hospital. I wasn't rushed to the hospital because she ran the stop sign. I was rushed to the hospital because I did not listen to the instructions of my mother. If I would have stayed in the yard as my mother had instructed me to do, I would have been enjoying a beautiful day, but instead I spent 3 days laying in a hospital bed and months later trying to recover fully from the injuries that I had accumulated. In a real sense, ladies and gentlemen, if we do not listen to the instructions of our instructors, we'll find ourselves being burdened down by ministry instead of enjoying the fruits of our labor. In addition to hearing, notice with me in Proverbs 4:1, hear, O sons, that King Solomon directs his imperatives specifically to his sons. As the children of a king, it is safe to assume that Solomon's sons were taught by the best teachers. It was safe to assume that Solomon's sons were trained by the best tutors. It was safe to assume that Solomon's sons received the best education that money could buy. Just as Solomon's sons received the best education that money could buy, you and I, my fellow graduates, as students of the College of Biblical Studies, have received the best education that money could buy. But what good is receiving the best education that money could buy if you do not live the best education that we have received? In addition to living the lessons of our instructors, if we are going to place ourselves in a position to be successful in life, in ministry, King Solomon offers us one more thing that we must do and know to do so. Live the lessons of our instructors, but also, or lastly, learn to sit in silence before you stand to speak. One of the misconceptions of a commencement service is that it gives the impression that learning has somehow come to an end. But Solomon destroys this misunderstood idea in the latter half of Proverbs 4:1 when he says, and give attention that you may gain understanding. At first glance, it appears to be a parallel statement. Hear and give attention. But a closer look at the text proves that this is not a parallel statement as much as it is a perpendicular statement, because one depends on the other. To hear implies doing what you know, but to give attention implies knowing what you do. You can't do what you know until you know what to do. Therefore, Solomon says, hear, O sons, and then he says, give attention first. Before you start running off to do ministry, you better not give up your seat as a student, because you need to know what to do in order to progress in life. Unfortunately, some of us will walk out of this room thinking that we know everything. But if you got good sense, then you ought to know that you have learned, that we have learned a lot of things at the College of Biblical Studies. We know how to exegete a passage. We know how to research material to find out the answer that we want to know. We have learned several things at the College of Biblical Studies, but in all that we have learned, we should know that there's still much to be learned. The American poet Maya Angelou captured this idea on an episode of Oprah's Masterclass when she stated at 82 years of age, she was still learning. This woman, who people come to her for advice, stated that she was still learning. This woman who have stood on stages and spoken to masses of people stated, "I'm still learning." She captured the idea that you ought never give up your seat as a student, even though you have transitioned to the stance of a teacher. Every once in a while, you ought to take a break from speaking and sit down and let somebody speak to you. We can position ourselves to be successful in life and ministry, my fellow graduates, if we live the lessons that we have learned from our instructors. We can position ourselves to be successful in life and ministry if we learn to sit in silence before we stand to speak. 18 years before I was born, the Dallas Cowboys won the 1971 Super Bowl under the leadership of head coach Tom Landry and starting quarterback Roger Staubach. If you know anything about the 1970s, obviously I don't. But what I hear is when Roger got to the league, he was a hot-headed quarterback who was determined to do his own thing. The coach would tell him, "Roger, throw the ball," and Roger would take off running. The coach would tell Roger, "Run the ball," and Roger would throw the ball out of bounds. Roger just would not do what his coach told him to do, and as a result, the Dallas Cowboys were losing badly. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Roger Staubach and the Dallas Cowboys, the 1971 Dallas Cowboys, are being handed the Super Bowl championship. A local reporter ran up to Roger after the game had concluded and said, "Roger, tell me the secret that got you this success." It was then that Roger said something that pierced my theological intellect. He said, "There is no secret. The only thing that we did to get to this point was do what our coach told us to do. When he told us to throw the ball, we just threw the ball. When he told us to run the ball, we just ran the ball. And because we did what he told us to do, we made it to this point." All I'm trying to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, as I sit in my seat, is that if you want to position yourself to be successful in life, in ministry, you got to learn how to throw the ball when the coach say throw it. You got to learn how to take off running when the coach say take off running. You have to position yourself to be successful in life and ministry. No, this is no easy task. To place yourself in a position to be successful is not an easy task, but when the road gets rough, we ought to remember the poetic words of Edgar Guest in his poem, "It Couldn't Be Done." Edgar Guest says, somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't, but he wouldn't be one who would say so until he tried. So he buckled it in with a bit of a grin on his face. If he worried at all, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you that it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to excel you, but just buckled it in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that couldn't be done, and you'll do it.